Okay, we're recording. Good morning to everyone.
Morning.
Hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. We're gonna begin in a moment now that the now that the winter has set in. I actually had, I think, two
As
people recently asked me what topics we're going to be doing after these many years of really going through quite a few topics, you might say. And a new book was just recently published. I don't, can you see this? Is that come out clearly on your screen? It's called
what is it?
Modern,
Modern Response.
Modern Respons
Modern,
Responso, by edited by Pamela Barmash, Jewish Publication Society, literally just hot off the presses. And we have a number of issues. I'm looking at the table of contents, and I think I'm going to go through quite a few of them that are here. So this will probably be the source. I mean, she divides it into personal and business ethics. While we have talked about some business ethics, how about whistleblowing, the requirement to report employer wrongdoing? That's an interesting one. On the mitzvah of sustainability, okay? Ritual. She's got a whole series of a sex offender in the synagogue. Okay, that sounds interesting. What are the chances that our prayers are answered by God? Oh, always a good question. Personal status, talking about mamzerut, which is illegitimacy, patrilineal and matrilineal. Some issues of women we've already talked about, but there are some that we have not. Medical ethics. A woman suffering from Alzheimer's disease whose husband wishes to divorce her. Interesting issue. Okay. Eating on Yom Kippur when a person is suffering from an eating disorder. Okay, that sounds interesting. And some other relationships with others, State of Israel, life in the United States. Oh, we missed it. American Thanksgiving. Okay, so I think we've got a few topics that just as I'm saying to myself, we've hit the big ones, shall we say? So now let's talk about some other ones. All right, so I see again we have Rini, good morning, and Eddie and Carol, and Eddie. I am recording. Can you see that on your screen? Can you tell?
yes, it's in the upper left-hand corner on every
Okay,
screen.
so typically, I mean, I've been on many meetings where the voice from the beyond comes on. This meeting is being recorded. You ever hear that happen? We don't get that, so you just have to take our screen word for it. Okay, so let us begin.
Rabbi,
Yes,
it
Rini.
is being recorded well because when we were away in New Zealand, I watched your class.
Downstairs.
Good.
Bye.
So it was recorded properly.
I'm glad to hear that. I know.
Yeah, well, it was 4 a.m. or something. I wasn't going to watch it in person.
Yeah, I mean that's the time that there's devotion, and then there's let's be real, so I appreciate that. And actually I think I mentioned that I was told by the office that there actually are a number of people who are watching the recording, so that's good to know. Good to know. Modern technology, what would we do without it? Anyway, so I just want to take a look at the end. Last time we started with one of the two teshuvot on transgender issues in Judaism. The first one we looked at, and we're going to summarize this one. We'll look at the last paragraph of this one in a moment, and then we'll go to the second one. Was by Rabbi Meir Rabinowitz, a professor, one of my professors. Actually, he was my first Talmud professor when I was a student at Jewish Theological Seminary.
Me too.
Oh, you know him as well. Wonderful teacher, lovely, a wonderful guy. And this was written again. Where's the date? Oh, You don't have a date. Well, this is about 2001, I believe.
2003.
2003. Okay. 2003. Which, when we talk about some of these issues, is quite a while ago. And you'll notice a couple of things. I think I mentioned I was curious about the fact that there were so many abstentions on both of these teshuvot. So I asked, where is she? Rabbi Susan Grossman, who's a member of the committee, and she didn't have any insight into that. I have my suspicions as to why so many abstained, but I can't tell you this. So in 2003, oh, there it is, 2003. It's right on the top. How do you like that? The question was, what is the sexual status of the person who's going now? Now, notice how very narrow this teshuva is. It's very narrow in just asking the status. Is this person male or female who is undergoing SRS? And the assumption here in this teshuva is that a person changes gender by having sexual replacement, or what is it called? Sexual, gee, I'm forgetting these.
Reassignment?
Reassignments, thank you. There are a lot of abbreviations and terminology, some of which were new to me, and I think it's very important that we are familiar with these terms because these are coming up constantly. If you've been following the college volleyball tournaments and the recent election, a lot of these terms are coming up. Sexual reassignment surgery. So notice how narrowly it is focused on the issue of someone who has gone through sexual reassignment surgery, as if that is the issue, okay? And can sexual reassignment surgery redefine the basic status of male and female? And of course, there are a lot of questions that have to do with marriage, divorce, and those other issues of Jewish law. And he goes through it. And we went through it last week, so I just want to go, let's just review his conclusions. There we go. Sorry, got it right there. Okay. Conclusions. Only those who have gone through full sexual reassignment surgery, including, and I may pronounce these wrong, phalloplasty or vaginoplasty, are to be considered as having changed their sex status and recognized by Jewish law. All right, so this is a very narrow definition, as we will see, of the question of gender, and these are issues which will be dealt with in much more detail. In the second issue, we'll see this question of physical characteristics, gender identity, sexual identity, which are not necessarily bundled into one definition. A person who has undergone partial sexual reassignment surgery is not deemed to have changed their sex status. So this is a pretty strict rule that we're seeing here. Now he has to go through the issues of Jewish law. A brit or hatafat dam brit, again, hatafat dam brit is taking of a drop of blood where the foreskin had been attached if a person has had a brit milah, is not required for one who has undergone a phalloplasty. Okay, so someone who surgically has had a phallus created does not have to have a brit milah. Again, a Jewish divorce is not necessary if one spouse undergoes SRS, since the kiddushin, the legal aspects of a marriage ceremony, are automatically annulled. However, in the case of a male to female person, a get should be given before the SRS is completed. You know, that seems to be, so there's a logic to that. Recognition by civil authorities of the new sex status is required. Again, we're dealing very narrowly in order to marry a person who has undergone SRS. This will prevent us from performing same-sex marriages according to civil law. At that time, same-sex marriages were not recognized by civil law. You cannot, as a rabbi, do something that civil law. You cannot violate civil law. You know, that's the classic question of an elderly person, a widow and a widower whose first spouse has passed away, and if they get married, they have consequences for their Social Security, right? So people come to a rabbi and say, Rabbi, do a Jewish wedding for us, but don't do a civil ceremony. That's illegal and cannot be done. When one does a Jewish wedding, one becomes an actor in the state, and therefore a Jewish wedding cannot be done and not carry civil implications, cannot be done also as I said, yeah. Once you get married, you're married, and the civil law applies. But that is a question that does come up. A new name should be given to the person with new sexual status by means of a mishaberach. Okay. Now, he does ask an interesting question. Those are his conclusions. Somewhat narrow. Is sexual reassignment surgery permissible? In other words, if someone came to a rabbi and said, Rabbi, can I have sexual reassignment surgery? Before it is actually done, does Judaism allow can the rabbi say yes, as opposed to someone who has had sexual reassignment surgery and then comes to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, what is my status? Well, according to this teshuvah, if a person has already done so, the status has changed from either male to female or female to male. But here's the question. Well, what if someone before the surgery says to you, Rabbi, is it allowable by Judaism? A legitimate and reasonable question. And he talks about this question, whether it is the tovat acholeh. Is it a benefit to the person who is ill? By the way, that is making the assumption that the issue for sexual reassignment surgery is an illness, right? That there is something medically wrong with the person, and the surgery is correcting something that is medically wrong. That has to be the assumption, okay? And there are two questions. Castration is forbidden, okay? Sirus, castration, is a biblical prohibition, and sterilization is also prohibited but not punishable. It's not uncommon in Jewish law, which they say, oh, you're not supposed to do that, but if you did it, yeah, you're not going to get punished. Okay. It is considered a mutilation of the body, right? We've seen this before. That mutilation of the body is not permitted. That has to do with issues such as tattoos. Did we talk about cosmetic surgery? I don't even remember. Sorry, it's been a long time. But the general issue. I remember having a person asking me about this, about a breast reduction surgery. Was that mutilation of the body? And there, in the case, there was the clearly medical requirement because there was physical distress being caused, and the physical distress could be solved. So that was l'tovat hacholeh. Okay. Now, while it is possible to argue that a male who has fulfilled the mitzvah of peru or revu of procreation is no longer obligated to perform that mitzvah, and women are not obligated regardless. However, according to some authorities, if castration or sterilization caused by the removal of the sexual organs is due to disease or trauma, in other words, we're not talking about someone who says, gee, I want to change my sex. I have cancer in these organs and they've got to be removed in order to remove the cancer. Well, of course we allow for that. Okay. So that is, or was born without the sexual organs, or has an accident, and because of the accident has to have surgery. Okay, the person is permitted to marry, right? He's saying there are exceptions to this rule about the removal of sexual organs, which we do consider a mutilation, but there are times that prohibition does not apply. Okay, so what is he saying? It would seem that people undergoing the process of sexual resurgence, SRS, as stated in the standard of care, he's using the medical standards, are doing so because they are suffering from gender dysphoria, and SRS is treating the patient with gender dysphoria. Their pain and anguish is great, and there is no doubt they are suffering. It goes along. So he therefore it may be permissible, and the prohibition against castration can be overridden in this case. So he is saying that it is permissible, and the same would apply to causing harm. So here, hormonal treatment would be permitted. However, due to lack of studies about the long-term effectiveness of SRS in dealing with gender identity disorder, we would recommend at this time that we counsel those who ask us for the halakhic opinion concerning this type of treatment to consider the lack of sufficient studies that document the beneficial results of this treatment and how it relates to our halakhic decisions. This in no way changes our conclusion concerning the people who have undergone SRS. They are to be considered having changed their sex status as stated in the conclusions to this teshuva. So what he is saying is that at that time in 2004, if someone came to a rabbi and said, gee, I would like to have the sexual reassignment surgery, we would be cautious. Even though we could say it's permitted for your benefit, we don't know the long-term effects. This is in 2004. He's very cautious. And he also, again, repeats the question that people who have, in order for us to consider, in other words, think of it, the question that he's asking and answering is, what is a person male or female, depending upon their anatomy? That's the narrow question he's looking at. And he says, we generally say if it's for your benefit, you can do it, but we want to be cautious. And certainly, once it's done, that changes your status. Okay, comments or questions so far on this teshuva? Charlie, you've got your hand.
Just a general comment, Rabbi, that people look at their own decision. They want to do this, or they want to go left, or they want to go right. What about the impact of their decision on everyone else around them, like their family, or their, let's say they're married at the time that they want to make this change? The impact of their decision.
Okay.
That becomes totally secondary, and everyone's only concerned with the impact on the person themselves. So what about the impact on everybody else?
Okay, very clearly, Charlie, this teshuva has not approached that question very much, right? What you're pointing out is that it's not in this teshuva, and that, of course, it does have implications. What those implications are, how they are to be weighed, is an important question. But notice, he is not at all concerned with that question. We'll see a different way of looking at it when we look at the other teshuva. Oh, good morning, Thor, and welcome. Always good to see you. Okay, Rini.
Well, this what I do like about this conclusion is that the suffering is not necessarily physical. Obviously, they're talking about someone's mental health, living in the wrong body. And I remember when we talked about abortion and end-of-life issues, it was also for the mental health of the person. Especially, I remember abortion is permitted for the mental health of the woman. And then I personally think that the person himself or herself really can't worry about the implications for the rest of the family because it's their life, and the rabbis seem to be concerned about the person and not if his mother's going to like it.
Okay, well, we'll see what on this next teshuva says about that. But you're right that mental health is a factor, as is physical health. Correct. Yes. Okay, any other comment or question before we move on to the next one? Carol, yes, please.
I assume that all of this would be the same, not just for castration, but for removing the breast of a woman.
Absolutely. In other words, yeah, when you talk about sexual reassignment surgery, some talk about upper and lower, right? And I think the assumption he is making is that the person, when he is talking about sexual reassignment surgery, he's talking about everything. I mean, I think that's pretty good. I will have to admit, though, you probably notice it a little. This again, he's talking very narrowly about this. He's not talking about concerns that, well, what if a person has gender dystopia?
Dysphoria.
Dysphoria, thank you. What if a person has gender dysphoria but doesn't want to have surgery? Right? That's not impossible. And it's not part of this, he's saying that in the narrow case of how we define a male or a female, this is how we define a male or a female. He's not dealing, as we will see in the other teshuva, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? I think that's something that we will see. Okay, any other comments or questions before we move on? Okay. I forgot to open I want to open a document, which I'm sorry I did not do yet. Okay. Okay, good. I'm going to stop this share. And what we're going to look at is another teshuva, a more recent one by a member of the Rabbinical Assembly. And I think it is as we've seen when we looked at the authors who wrote. There was a Reform rabbi who wrote a document we looked at, and there was an Orthodox scholar, not a rabbi, but a very well-educated layperson who wrote a document. So let's just be clear as to who's writing the teshuva that the conservative movement is going to be considering. Okay, and that's Rabbi Leonard Sharzer, MD. I just want us to know that who are we talking about? We're talking about someone who is very well learned, both in the medical and the rabbinical world. And that's important to remember because we're dealing with issues in both cases. So here's someone who became a doctor, Boston University School of Medicine, University of Iowa, an MS in surgery, fellowship in surgery, although in Kentucky, in Australia, the residency in Virginia. He's on the faculty of Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So this is no lightweight here we're talking, right? We're talking about someone who's got significant credentials, right? He operated in and led medical missions to Africa and China to operate on children with cleft lip and palates. And then he retired from medical practice in 1999, entered the rabbinical school at JTS, and he was ordained in May 2003. It wasn't enough. My son, the doctor and rabbi, right? To use an old term, right? So when he was at a seminary person, he received various prizes. He's written books. He's working on a book on ethical issues in plastic surgery. He has organized conferences. In other words, okay, this is someone with significant credentials in both medical and rabbinic world, which I think is wonderful that we have someone who writes who has that sort of background. Okay, so that's who we're going to be seeing writing this other teshuva, which I will pull up in a moment. No, sorry, wrong one. Oh, I have to open the other. There it is. Okay, 1 second. I got to do the screen share. Screen share. Okay. Okay, does everybody see that? Is it on your screen? The transgender Jews in halacha? Yes? Okay, good. I can make it slightly larger. I know it's a little small. Let me see if I can make it a little. Okay. How's that? That's even larger. Okay, that even clearer? Good.
Would agree. It's okay.
It's okay. Everybody can read that? Okay. All right. Rabbi Leonard Sharzer, MD, voted on in 2017, about 7 years ago. Again, I'm sorry, it just struck me is that, again, we have 8 abstentions. I don't know why. I probably could ask some of my other friends on the committee. I could call Elliot Dorff, I suppose. Maybe I should send Elliot Dorff an email, see what he has to say. He usually responds to me, but I was in touch with Susan Grossman, who I also know. So here's the teshuva. Recent, 11 in favor, 8 abstention, and some you may recognize some of these names. Well, Danny Nevins, we've seen very Avi Reisner, Ruvain Hammer. Yeah, these are people I'm Pamela Barmash. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so here's the question. Now note, as narrow as the first teshuva was, this teshuva is going wide. Is not just dealing narrowly with this question as to who's the male and who's the female. I know some of you didn't like that example from Eliyahu Hanavi, right? But I have to say, I thought it was in the other teshuva, it was a brilliant suggestion that here's a person who changed his status. And what if his wife wanted to get remarried? She married a man and now he's an angel. In legal circles, you have to look for some sort of precedent. Okay, but they didn't really answer the question, even though they found that odd, unusual precedent. Okay, so notice the questions that he's going to notice. These we've got 12 questions. Rituals for conversion of transgender, rituals for solemnizing a marriage. Is the marriage dissolved before or after transition? Okay. Requirements for continue. Do you have to continue a marriage? All right. Might you have to end it? Are hormonal therapy and gender affirming surgery permissible? Okay. So again, he's going to ask that same question, which was asked at the end of the Rabinowitz Teshuvah. Are trans men permitted to get pregnant? What if they didn't have the surgery? A trans man, i.e. a woman who has the genitals of a woman, is now a trans man, but chose not to have any sexual reassignment surgery. Can that person become pregnant? Good question. How must healthcare professionals interact? Who should prepare the body for the transgender person for burial? Transgender person dies. When we have a Chevra Kadisha, it's only the same gender, of course. I've been on the Chevra Kadisha because you have to wash the body, and after you wash the body, you have to put it in shrouds, right? Good question. Preoperative trans women obligated for Brit Milah, right? At what point in the process of transition is the person recognized as a new gender? See, in the previous Teshuvah, it was open and closed. Full SRS, that changes it. Not full SRS, that doesn't change it. Now he's asking a more subtle question. Wait a second. Not everybody has full SRS. And what if they don't have full SRS? And they define themselves as in a different gender? Do we recognize that? That's reality. Is a ritual necessary to affect the transition of a trans person? You know, we have conversion rituals, we have marriage rituals, life cycle events are full of rituals in Judaism. Yes, of course, the rabbis couldn't imagine that. It's a different society, different time, different medical understanding. Well, what about now? Okay. So you see, he's asking a much broader series of questions about transgender. I will also point out that I'm not going to look at all the footnotes, but occasional footnote is useful. I am deeply indebted to Rabbi Jill Borodin, Professor Aaron DeVore, Dr. Ronald Hellman, Rabbi Rona Matlow. That is a title that is given to women, Orthodox women, who go through a training that is pretty much parallels the training that an Orthodox rabbi would receive, but in the Orthodox movement, they don't call them rabbis. They use some other term, and there are several different terms they use, but this is a woman as educated as any Orthodox rabbi, okay? And several doctors. So she had a lot of people, Rabbi Mika Buck Yael. So he's really gone out and he's an expert to begin with, and he recognizes that he needed a great deal of input from many other people about this. Okay. Introduction. He points out, to be human is to be physically sexed and culturally gendered, right? Most humans are either men or women. They may not be either or both, yet not all bodies are clearly male or female. We might also, not all people are clearly male or female. The halakhic concerns related to transgender Jews, and he makes reference to the 2000 teshuvah that we just read. In the 14 years since approval of that teshuvah, there's been a sea change in our society as a society at large, and no less in Jewish community, of the meaning of gender and gender identity. I challenge anyone here to say that they think the exact same about gender and gender identity today as they did in 2003. I will be the first to admit I taught some things to religious school students in a religious school, high school 30 years ago, which I would not say today. Very different feeling about this. This has in large part to the result of more and more transgender people being open about themselves in their daily lives, as well as in books and as part of the online discussion advocacy groups. The presence of transgender people in popular culture has gone a long way to demystifying the experience of many, right? You would be hard-pressed 30 years ago to say, oh, this is a transgender person. This is a transgender person I've seen in a movie. I've seen on a quiz show. Any of you watch Jeopardy?
Yep.
More than a few transgender people have appeared on Jeopardy. One of their greatest champions is a transgender person, right? In the Jewish world, the ordination of transgender rabbis and the lived experience of transgender Jews, their parents, their spouses, and their children, again, Charlie, here's your question, what about the rest of the family, have also helped to give a human face to those living out this life experience and to identify areas which the Jewish community has not addressed adequately and often not at all, right? I mean, you know, one of the Orthodox scholar, we said, well, why didn't they talk about this in the shtetl? Because they kept quiet about it, because it was not socially acceptable, because you didn't want to publicly say this. You would be excluded from the community, right? That was not just true in the shtetl, it was true in the entire society at that point, right? Okay, so that's I think he's saying, you know, a lot has changed since 2003. And all those changes means that we need to take a new look at some of these aspects of Jewish law. Okay. And then he points out changes in language, right? Pronouns. I hate to use this example again, but my wife pointed out that last night on Jeopardy, one of the contestants was referred to as they. Did you see that? Tammy, you noticed that too, right? Right, that person prefers they. Hey, you know, I may or may not like that, but you know, a person's got to. We assume personal autonomy can decide that that's what they want to be referred to as. So, okay, all right. Personal pronouns, language, right? English is many languages are very clearly gendered. Hebrew, because it is, is the language of ritual prayer. And, it's also a gendered language. Nouns are, I'm sure most of you know this, in most languages, nouns are male or female. English is the odd one. See, we all assume that everything is like English. No, English is the odd one. and that's a problem. And here's where he'll see a very significant difference with Rabinowitz's teshuvah. What is the word change, right? For Rabinowitz's teshuvah, the change only occurs with a full surgical change. We have talked about sex change surgery, or a man changing to a woman, vice versa. This is more than a language problem because our conceptual understanding has been molded by language. We are beginning to understand that a transgender man, for example, has very likely had a male gender identity, certainly from a very early age, and certainly likely from birth, even though he may not have been aware of it or had the vocabulary to speak about or acted on it till much later. In many instances, the person's identity is not changed by surgery, not by hormonal therapy, not by psychotherapy. In other words, one's gender identity, his argument is inborn. It is possible to change the body's internal hormone milieu pharmacologically, and the body's anatomic appearance surgically to confirm the person's identity. But identity appears to be constant. So he is saying that even before any of the physiological or mental changes that might be brought upon by medical attention, even before those occur, the identity has been set. Again, Rabinowitz says the identity by Jewish law only goes by the surgical. Here he's saying the identity is set and the rest is irrelevant. That's a bold statement. Attempts to change gender identity by so-called conversion therapy have been discredited as ineffective, dangerous, and cruel, right? You hear about that, right? So here we have a major difference of understanding, and this is not just a question of Jewish law, but of understanding of how identity works, and it's not based upon purely medical procedures, therapies, or identities. Okay. Any comments so far? Question, comments so far? Okay. Okay. And then he points out very clearly, halakha is binary. Like everything in Judaism, it's either A or it's B, right? Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, is very no surprise to anybody here, talks about distinctions. It comes right out of the book of Genesis. I think I've mentioned this before. How does God create the world? By creating distinctions, day from night, land from water, right? People from animals, the Jewish people from the rest of the world. Distinctions, separation, clear definitions are something that is essential to Judaism, right? Although halakha deals with categories, the rabbis and halakhists deal with people, and that the transgender community is a large and diverse people, right? So in other words, if Judaism says male or female, you're either one or the other, because we have to fit you into the system, which says that males do. There are distinctions in halakha about roles, and now it's true that we've become more egalitarian, but Judaism does have this distinction of male and female, right? And he's going to give this quote, which says, okay, that's nice for Judaism, but real life doesn't work so easily into those binary categories. Gender exists. This is from quote from Joy Layden. Again, I didn't look up the author, but again, I'm assuming that he's quoting someone who is reputable. Gender exists as a place where the inner life meets the embodied life. It is neither purely personal and internal, nor is it purely biological. Already, we see the difference with Rabinowitz, who sees it purely biological. Each of us carries a distinct internal sense of ourself as a gendered being, right? For the vast majority, but not everybody, we have a sense I'm male or I'm female. Yeah, that works for most people, but it doesn't work for everybody. Each of us is also assigned an official gender by the culture in which we live at the time of our birth. Usually pretty clear physiologically, but sometimes not. And even if it's clear physiologically, it may not be clear as the person grows up mentally, okay? We prefer some activity, styles of communication, styles of dress. We appear as male or female, right? But what about people whose internal sense of gender is fundamentally at odds with the gender assigned to them at birth? This has not been a topic of great concern, not just in Judaism, but in society at large. Okay, this has little to do with not with the characters. Gender is more than how one dresses, which stereotypical behaviors one enjoys, right? Do you play with trucks or do you play with dolls? Right? Nowadays, they make the trucks for girls and dolls for boys, right? So,
Right.
okay, we try not to be stereotypical, right? Gender describes the internal map of the self, okay? So therefore, there's a problem, right? We must acknowledge that our understanding of human sex and sexuality and gender, limited though it be, it may be, is advanced far beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. So here he's saying Jewish law and tradition is now going to be subject to advanced knowledge, and advanced knowledge should have an effect on our understanding. Now, there are those in a very traditional Jewish community who would say, rabbis knew everything, everything's in the Torah, everything is there. Advanced knowledge does not change our view of these things, right? We have people, we have, by the way, Jewish and Christian societies who will say that. In some way, the more fundamentalist right-wing view of looking at text has a similarity both in Jewish, non-Jewish, and other religions. Here he's saying that's not right. Increased knowledge, scientific, and let's be clear, there is something known as objective scientific knowledge that's coming under attack, but let's assume, I don't think this is too far of an assumption, objective scientific knowledge must affect how we look at some of these traditional definitions in Jewish law, right? Halakha is binary. People are not. I think that's one of the most important sentences in this whole teshuvah. Halakha is binary. You're either male or female. You're male, you do this. You're female, you do that, and you can't do this. But people are not. What do you do when people are not, right? Well, the rabbis understood this, and we already have seen that. Now, here's the question that we've seen before. Yes, the rabbis were not dumb. The rabbis saw the world. The rabbis were quite intelligent and quite aware of how the world works. They recognized, and we saw those definitions, which I brought last time, of people who did not perfectly conform to the physiological gender of either male or female. We know that happens. Guess what? It happened in ancient times, and the rabbis saw it and defined it, and they saw it, and they had different types of definitions, right? Androgynous, a person whose body is not typically male or female. Tumtum, a person who is either male or female, but whose gender is unknown because the organs are hidden. You know, they talked about they can't really tell. Or saris, a eunuch, right? A sterile might have been created because of castration or because of some other medical condition. And the elonit, a female sex reversal. In other words, here's what's an important sentence. Those specifics are not as important as that for the rabbis, they were neither clearly male nor clearly female. So in other words, yes, the rabbis understood that there were people who did not fit into the categories. Okay, that's a small percentage of people. You'll note that one of the first texts we looked at said, oh, the rabbis understood there were many different genders because of the small number of people who didn't fit as the categories. And that's pushing it too much. No, the rabbis did not understand there were many, many different genders. No, the rabbis had two genders, and they had a bunch of people who just kind of didn't fit. And they tried to figure out, well, for this reason, for this purpose, they're male, for that purpose, they're female, and they tried to work that out. But they were not defining those people with anomalous genitals as a whole separate gender. They were just defining what they saw between them and were saying, hey, we got a couple of exceptions here. They don't fit the system. Okay, right? All right. Here, for example, they recognized that there were people who did not fit the halakhic binary, that halakhic gender categories were not applied to them in a consistent across-the-board manner. What do you do with exceptions? Hey, we got an exception to the rule. How do we apply it? Well, sometimes there are not rules on how to apply it. And sometimes people can say, well, this is an exception. We should do it this way. You know, this person deserves a pardon for the crimes that he or she has committed for that reason. Well, that's an exception to the rule. How big is the exception? Does that mean there's a new category? There's legal and illegal, and then there's another category? No, it means that we're trying to fit into the system exceptions to the rules, and how we apply them. Good people can disagree. We try to put them into the system, and they come out one way or the other, okay? Comments, questions so far? Okay. For example,
Carol
the
wants to speak.
I'm sorry, someone? Comment? No. Okay. Okay. So sometimes they were men, sometimes they were women. They had to fit them into the categories, these exceptions, and people can disagree. You know, good people can look at the evidence and say, this person for this purpose is a male. This person for that purpose is a female. We got to fit them into the system some way or the other. And that's a judgment call. It's not the creation of a new gender. Okay. So what Rabbi, and now he's quoting Rabinowitz, right? That once a transgender person has transitions, which means physical change, they're treated as a new gender. This may be appropriate for some. Here's where the crux of this teshuva is. Rabbi Rabinowitz is too narrow. He's only talking about people who had surgery, full surgery, right? But it is problematic for individuals who do not identify as either male or female. Gender nonconforming, and here we go, gender queer, non-binary. I know, I get confused too. There are a lot of different terminologies that are used nowadays, as well as those who do not undergo all, right? You know, somebody whose gender identity is different from their physical identity. Okay, that happens. What is important for this teshuva is the willingness of the rabbis to apply halachic paradigms in a non-rigidly binary fashion. Another key sentence in this teshuva. You know, we got people who are neither male nor female by certain traditional definitions. What do we do with them? Let's take a look at them and let's make some decisions. Which should guide our analysis and decisions. And again, as somebody with both a medical degree and a rabbinic degree is certainly capable of trying to at least give us some guidance as to how we look at these things. Okay, comments, questions so far? All right, that's where he's going. Oh, good, we still have some time. Okay. Judaism is a embodied religion, right? Judaism is just not worried about matters of the spirit, right? Judaism is not just worried about going out into the desert and contemplating God and sitting on a tree all day, or transcendental meditation all your life. No, Judaism is embodied, right? Gender differences are socially constructed, but the sexual organs of human beings do determine certain behavior. Brit Milah applies to male. Nidah, menstrual separation and going to the mikveh, that only applies to female. As egalitarian as we like to be, you know, again, this is sometimes parodied by people who are opposed to egalitarianism, but the truth is, yes, of course, we can be both egalitarian and at the same time say that there are certain. Jack, I just want Jack, you're here. Good to see you, but I think you need to mute because we were hearing some background noise. Okay, Jack.
Okay.
Jack, you can hear me good. Okay, all right. So they're saying, you know, we're egalitarian, but there are differences between the genders. The mitzvah of procreation applies to men. By the way, did you know that? Only men are required to have children, not women, because becoming pregnant subject to dangers to their health, right? So the rabbis do not obligate women, and certainly in pre-modern times, pregnancy and childbirth was a very dangerous situation. Why are there so many stepmothers in fairy tales? Because a lot of women died in childbirth. Even today, when risks have decreased substantially, the risks inherent in pregnancy and labor for women still remain far greater than the risks of intercourse for procreation for men. Okay, understood. We have differences. Fine. This teshuva is written from the perspective of conservative Judaism and those in the movement who accept gender egalitarianism. If you don't accept, you know, he's trying to say we're going to deal with halacha. His position is, and by the way, let us be very clear, the vast, vast majority of the conservative movement is gender egalitarianism. If you say to somebody in the United States, I go to a conservative synagogue, the assumption that you will make is that you have gender egalitarianism. Non-egalitarianism is a very rare matter in the conservative movement. Except in specific cases, that no halakhic difference between male and female. So he's not going to address issues such as which side of the mechitza one should sit on, right? In the Orthodox world, which side of the mechitza do you sit on? Do you have to have surgery to sit on the other side? Or if you didn't have surgery, do you sit on the other side? Not his problem. Whether one may lead parts of the service, whether one must don tefillin, right? There's another mitzvah, which in the traditional world is only applicable to men. By the way, in the conservative movement, it's applicable to men and women, of course. Or be on a bet din, or be a witness, which again are roles that traditionally were only for males. Okay. So far, so good. Stop me. Stop me if you need to. Okay. Okay. I think, like all of us, I have learned a whole new vocabulary in the last 20 years. And I think that is very helpful. It is a sign of acceptance, and it is very important for all of us to at least know the vocabulary that we see. Okay. And if some of these terms are new to some of you, okay, some of these terms were new to me at one point, and they are why do these terms exist? These terms exist because, as he has previously said, this binary male-female and everything that goes with being male and everything that goes with being female being assumed is not the case in the real world. And that's, again, we saw that prior in this teshuva. Given that, we need terminology to express our understanding. So he gives us some terminology. And again, if it's new, great. It'll make it a lot easier when you read and hear things nowadays. Okay. Cisgender, a term to apply to a person whose gender identity aligns with those typically associated with the sex to them at birth. A cisgender male is a person who had male genitalia and identifies as a male. Simple, no question, does the same thing, cis woman. Okay, so that's pretty clear. Okay. Oops, I'm not sure what this is. Okay. We're going to go through some of these because it's important to understand these terms, because he uses these terms both later in the Teshuvah, and also I think as just people who exist in this world, we need to have some understanding of the definitions. And stop me if some of these are not clear. Gender dysphoria, right? A person's assigned gender is not the same as the one that they identify. Has nothing to do with surgery, has nothing to do with psychotherapy. It just means a person who has a difference of their physical characteristics and their internal sense of gender. Okay. Gender expression, playing football. Well, that's not clear. The type of hair, right? Long hair, short hair. Is your voice high or low? What type of clothing do you wear? Okay. Gender identity, one's innermost concept of oneself as a male, a female, a blend, or neither. Okay. Gender nonconforming. People who do not behave in a way that conforms to the traditional expectations of their gender, right? Okay. Gender queer. This, again, was somewhat new to me. Genderqueer people typically reject notions of static categories of gender and embrace a fluidity of gender identity and often, though not always, sexual orientation. They may be both male and female, neither, or outside these categories. Okay, that was a new one on me, I have to say. Gender transition, okay. Some people transition socially by dress and names, others do physical. So in other words, he's saying there's a difference. It's not just the physical. Sexual orientation, an inherent or immutable in their emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Again, not dependent upon physical characteristics. Notice he doesn't say that. Transgender, okay, an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and/or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. It does not imply any specific sexual orientation. Transgender people may be straight, gay, lesbian, or bisexual. That's a whole, in other words, he's distinguishing between gender identity, right, and sexual orientation, which we normally assume go together. But for some people, they don't. Transsexual. Transsexual refers to a person who experiences a mismatch of the sex they were born and the sex they identify. Sometimes medical treatment, sometimes not. Some have surgery, some don't. Oh, okay. I'd like to finish these today. Okay. Transvestite. You don't hear that very much nowadays. It has a very negative connotation. Sometimes you hear cross-dresser, people who wear clothing assigned to a gender not their own. Okay, it's you don't just hear it. I mean, that's the term. All right. You obviously the word drag is more socially acceptable for people who dress as females who were assigned as male at birth. I'm not even sure. Does it work the other way also? Person who was assigned female but dresses in male clothing, that's transvestite? Is that right? It gets complicated, I admit. Okay. Sex reassignment surgery, we've talked about that. There's top surgery, breast augmentation or mastectomy, chest reconstruction, shaving down one's Adam's apple, bottom surgery, altering genitals. Okay. And finally, intersex, a group of conditions in which there was a discrepancy between the external genital anatomy and the internal genital organs. Okay, that happens. The older term hermaphroditism has been replaced by this one. There's a great deal of variation. And there are many medical terms that are used for the different types of variations and where the variations occur. Not important to go into detail, but he's trying to be complete. So I think we can leave it at that. Okay, comments or questions to this point? Anyone find some new terms they'd never heard of before?
Yep.
Was this helpful nowadays?
No.
Now we're in a different world nowadays in terms of these of some of these terms. Okay, I'll just start this. We only have a couple minutes left. Notice what he calls this section. He calls it strategies for gender assignment. He's not saying the assignment is fixed. He could of course call this how gender assignment works, but it says strategies, which implies a fluidity in the way this is going to occur, right? Gender is a binary social construct related to, but not identical with various dimensions of human sexual biology, which exist along a multiple non-congruent axes. In other words, you can't say female and then assume your female genitals and everything else falls in place. Maybe not. In modern times, there's an ongoing debate as to which of these dimensions or axes is the best determinant of gender. Is it the physical? Is it the psychological? Is it genetic? Is it in the brain? Still looking at this. And possibly, I think he's also saying, we really don't know for sure. We have some indications. We're still working on this. What determines gender assignment?
Rabbi, how
Yes.
does Maimonides or Rashi deal with this?
Again, if we're talking about
Yes.
the Middle Ages or any
Mhm.
society, either traditional Jewish or traditional non-Jewish, it wasn't on the radar. Of course, there were people who were not binary in
Here, let me just put this off.
Ruth, I think you need to please. Okay, thank you. In let's talk pre-modern time. How far back do we have to go? Not very. 50 years? 100 years? Oscar Wilde had a lot of problems, right? He got thrown in jail. And in many places around the world, it is still something that is not only socially not acceptable, but in some places it's a crime. In some places it's a capital crime. Still in places around the world. So to talk about how they dealt with it in the Middle Ages, the answer is it wasn't on their radar. We did see there was a teshuvah. He'll mention it later on, in which someone in the Middle Ages says, well, somebody was a male and then became a woman. Is he still married? And again, it's such an odd statement that it's really not something that is dealt with in any degree. Again, we have that Eliyahu Hanavi parallel. I know you don't like it. I actually like it. I think trying to find a parallel, someone whose status changed. But again, that's dealing with a very narrow legal question. Is the marriage valid? They're not dealing with all the areas of human interaction and human sexuality, but it's only if anything, the only thing that's dealt with is a very narrow statement. Well, this is kind of, maybe it happened or maybe it didn't happen. And if it did happen, which we can try to see as we can imagine it, what do they need to get? That's it. Not in the type of detail that we're seeing here. Okay. Comments or questions before we conclude?
I just told everybody you should watch you should go see the movie The Conclave. 'Cause
Okay.
they deal with this topic in a very unusual way.
Right. Okay. I didn't realize. I thought the conclave was just dealing with who's going to be the next pope.
No, it's much more.
Oh, okay. We have been warned. As I said, politics and religion. Oh no, politics can't possibly affect religious views, right? Okay. Thank you for that recommendation. But we'll continue from here next week. All right. No comments or questions. I hope we've learned a little bit. And
Yasher koach, Rabbi.
okay, Brooke, thank you.
Are there going to be more sources posted?
On this topic, I think this is about it. I think these will be the only sources. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I've got to take a closer look at some of the other things, but if there are, you'll see them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
Rabbi.
right. Again, thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
And
Thank
enjoy.
you.
I hope you're enjoying the turkey leftovers, or by now, hopefully, they have been either frozen,
Eating a lot of
thrown
turkey
away,
salad.
all right, made into a salad and consumed. Right. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too.